I'm Emily, 29, and I thought marrying into a powerful family meant acceptance, but instead, I became the target of endless ridicule, especially from my father-in-law. He mocked me, belittled my work, and made me the punchline of every family gathering. What he didn't know was that the very world he prided himself on belonged to me in ways he could never imagine. And the night he laughed the loudest was the night everything shattered, when the truth walked through the door and left him speechless. The restaurant lights glowed low and golden, catching the polished silverware and the faint reflections of the city skyline pressed against the wide glass windows. My husband's family had chosen this place, a place meant to impress, meant to showcase their sophistication, their long-standing status, their ease in a world of influence. The round table was crowded, yet it felt like all the space in the room had been pulled toward one man, my father-in-law. He sat with his back straight, his suit tailored just a little too tight, his smile stretched wide enough to show every tooth as he recounted stories that placed himself at the center of every victory. I had grown used to his dominance in these family dinners. He thrived on control, on being the loudest voice in the room, the one who reminded everyone of his wealth, his connections, his so-called wisdom. My husband, seated beside me, had learned long ago to let the storm pass, to let his father command the room until his energy finally waned. Tonight, however, there was an edge sharper than usual in his voice, and I knew it was directed squarely at me. "So," he said, leaning back, his hand casually gripping the stem of his water glass, "remind me again, dear. What is it that you actually do?" His tone carried no curiosity. It was bait, laced with derision, dipped in mockery. The laughter spread around the table like spilled oil catching fire. His siblings and their spouses chuckled politely, some out of fear, others out of habit. My mother-in-law gave the smallest wince, but she said nothing. No one ever told him to stop. He was the kind of man who took silence as approval, and he fed off it. I smiled faintly. Not a defensive smile, not one of discomfort. Just the kind of smile you give when someone has revealed themselves without realizing it. I kept my hands neatly folded on my lap, letting him go on. "Because if I recall correctly," he continued, his voice rising just enough to make sure the entire table leaned in, "you're not exactly working in, shall we say, the most prestigious field. I mean, nothing wrong with small-time jobs, of course. We all need people to run errands, to handle the little things. But let's be honest, my daughter could have married into something bigger." Another ripple of laughter. A clink of forks. A cousin covering her mouth as if the joke had slipped out too sharp but still enjoying it. My husband shifted slightly in his seat. His hand brushed mine beneath the table, a silent gesture that said, "I know, just hold on." And I did. Because what my father-in-law didn't understand was that the silence he interpreted as weakness was the strongest weapon in my possession. I glanced around the table, catching the eyes of each family member one by one. None of them held my gaze for long. They looked away quickly, afraid that being caught in my calm would somehow implicate them in his ridicule. That was the family's dynamic. His shadow loomed, and everyone else adjusted themselves to fit inside it. I sipped my water, unhurried, as though time itself belonged to me, because I knew what was about to walk through those doors. The restaurant's entryway opened with the subtle weight of importance, the kind of entrance that shifted the air, even before you knew why. Every head turned. A man in a sharp suit, dark navy, pressed with precision, his tie pinned perfectly, stepped inside. His stride was deliberate, his presence commanding without needing to speak a single word. He didn't glance at the hostess, didn't scan the room like a stranger. He moved as though he knew exactly where he was going. My father-in-law noticed him, his expression flickering for the first time all evening. Recognition washed across his face, followed swiftly by confusion. The man walking toward us was no ordinary executive. He was the CEO. The man who held my father-in-law's career in his palm, the one whose decisions shaped entire industries, the one whose approval was currency in every boardroom. And yet, he didn't walk toward him. He walked past. Past my father-in-law, past my husband, past the siblings with their stunned silence. He stopped directly at me. Sir, he said, his voice steady, his posture crisp as he gave a short, formal salute. Everything is ready as you requested. The restaurant hushed, the sound collapsing like a curtain dropping mid-performance. Even the clatter of dishes from the kitchen seemed to fade. All that remained was the echo of his words, landing like a stone in still water. I didn't move at first. I let the silence stretch, let the reality seep into every corner of the table. My father-in-law's fork slipped from his hand, clinking against the plate. His mouth opened, then closed, a half-formed sentence dying in his throat. His face, so used to commanding, so accustomed to superiority, drained of its practiced confidence. I leaned back slowly, mirroring the exact posture he had taken when he mocked me minutes earlier. My voice, calm and clear, cut through the silence. Now, I said, turning my gaze directly on him, where were we? The weight of those words settled heavier than any insult could have. No raised tone, no sharp edge, just the truth delivered plainly, and the truth was enough. Around the table, no one laughed. No one dared. Eyes darted, wide and uncertain, as if the world they thought they understood had suddenly tilted on its axis. My husband's hand tightened around mine beneath the table, not in reassurance this time, but in recognition. He knew this moment was the shift. My father-in-law sat frozen, his posture crumbling as reality closed in. The silence after my words clung to the table like fog, thick and unshakable. My father-in-law's face looked as though all the color had drained away in a single sweep. His lips moved, but no sound came. For the first time, the man who always had a response, always had the last word, sat mute. His hand shook slightly as he reached for his glass, trying to regain some sense of control, but even the movement betrayed him. The CEO remained beside me, his stance formal, his eyes not flickering toward anyone else. He wasn't here to impress this family. He wasn't here to mingle or exchange pleasantries. His presence was singular, for me. The rest of the table shifted uncomfortably in their seats, torn between disbelief and fear of what this revelation meant. Thank you, I said to the CEO, my tone even, almost casual. I gestured for him to wait a short distance away, and he gave a brief nod before stepping back, positioning himself within reach, but out of earshot. It was deliberate. It was a reminder, every decision here was mine. The moment should have ended there, but my father-in-law wasn't a man who surrendered easily. Pride kept him upright. Pride made him clear his throat as though to reclaim his voice. Well, he said, his tone uneven but loud enough to fill the air. Seems like you've got some connections. Impressive. Unexpected. His attempt at composure fell flat, the words brittle against the heavy weight of what everyone had just witnessed. Connections? I repeated, my eyebrows lifting slightly. I let the word linger, as though he'd chosen the smallest fragment of what the truth actually was. That's one way to describe it. My husband's siblings glanced at each other, trying to read the new landscape forming before them. I could see calculations in their eyes, where the power had shifted, how quickly their father's dominance had fractured. His wife remained still, her expression carefully blank, though her hands twisted in her lap, betraying her nerves. I turned my attention back to him. You wanted to know what I do, I said, my tone sharp enough to slice through the tension. You asked and I didn't answer. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't see the point in proving myself to someone who's already decided I'll never be enough. But now, it seems you need an answer more than I need to give one. The air thickened again, heavier with each word. His eyes flickered, narrowing, searching for a way to dismantle what I was building. Yet every second that passed made it clearer, he no longer had control. I leaned forward slightly, my voice steady. The CEO you just saw walk in, your CEO works with me. Not above me, not alongside me, with me. Because I'm not just your daughter-in-law with some small-time job. I run operations that stretch far beyond this city, beyond this company, into places you've only read about in headlines. What you see as small, others see as critical. What you mocked has built networks so strong your entire career is balanced on them. And the man you answer to knows that. My words struck with precision, each one deliberate. No flourish, no dramatics, only facts laid bare. He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again, but nothing coherent came out. The others around the table remained silent, every eye on me, every ear tuned to what came next. The CEO approached again, this time leaning slightly closer to me. "It's time," he said quietly, respectful, waiting for my approval. I gave a subtle nod, and he retreated once more. My father-in-law blinked rapidly, his composure slipping further. "Time? Time for what?" His voice carried a mix of suspicion and desperation, like a man realizing the ground beneath him was shifting too fast. I didn't answer immediately. I let the question hang, let him wrestle with it. When I finally spoke, I kept my tone simple. "Time for a meeting I arranged. One that determines your company's next phase. One that you weren't invited to attend." The effect was immediate. His jaw clenched, his body stiffened. Losing control of a dinner was one thing. Realizing he was excluded from a decision that would shape his future was another. He sat straighter, trying to mask the panic rising within him. The rest of the table avoided looking at him, but the message was clear. They saw it too. His authority, the pedestal he had built, was cracking. He tried to laugh, a short, sharp sound that didn't land. "You're bluffing," he muttered, though the uncertainty in his eyes betrayed the claim. "Bluffing?" I tilted my head. "You've spent years measuring people by the titles on their business cards, by the size of their salaries, by the circles they move in. You never asked me, not once, what my work actually involved. You never cared to know. You were comfortable mocking what you didn't understand. And now, the truth is sitting right in front of you, and still, you call it a bluff." His fingers tapped nervously against the tablecloth. He was unraveling, and everyone knew it. My husband, quiet until now, finally spoke. His voice was calm, steady, but there was steel behind it. "Dad, maybe you should stop talking." The command stunned the table more than anything else had. He had never spoken to his father like that, not in front of the family, not in a setting where his father's authority was absolute. The look on my father-in-law's face was a mix of shock and betrayal, but there was nothing he could say. "Not anymore." The CEO returned once more, his patience unwavering. "They're ready for you, ma'am." His tone carried a subtle finality, as though the conversation at this table had already ended. I stood slowly, my chair scraping softly against the floor. All eyes followed me, some in awe, others in disbelief. My husband rose with me, his hand brushing against mine briefly, a quiet show of support. I looked back at my father-in-law, meeting his eyes one last time before leaving the table. "You wanted to laugh at me tonight," I said, my voice calm but unflinching. "Instead, you watched the laughter die in your throat. Consider that the answer you were waiting for." Without waiting for a response, I walked toward the doors with the CEO beside me, my husband just a step behind. The restaurant staff moved discreetly out of the way, showing the respect as we passed, though no words were exchanged. The night air outside the restaurant was brisk, carrying the kind of quiet that makes everything sharper, clearer. I walked with steady steps, the CEO at my side, my husband just behind me. We moved past the valet line, past the whispers of strangers who glanced up and quickly looked away once they caught the gravity of the moment. I could still feel the weight of my father-in-law's stunned silence lingering behind me, but I didn't turn back. That chapter had already closed. The waiting car pulled up, sleek and understated. The CEO opened the door for me, his gesture deliberate, respectful. He wasn't just offering courtesy, he was showing the hierarchy in plain sight, one my father-in-law could never twist or deny. As I slid into the back seat, I felt the shift solidify, not just in the family dynamic, but in the structure of his entire world. My husband joined me, his face tight with unspoken thoughts. The CEO took the front seat, giving a short word to the driver, and the vehicle slipped into motion. The city lights blurred by, each one a reminder of the networks and influence I had quietly built while my father-in-law dismissed me as insignificant. For a long stretch, no one spoke. The silence wasn't heavy, it was steady, purposeful. My husband finally broke it, his voice low but steady. You've been holding all of this back from me, he said. Not as an accusation, but as a realization. Yes, I replied simply. Not because I didn't trust you, but because I didn't want what I do to define us. I wanted you to love me without the weight of titles or power. And you did. That's why tonight mattered. He nodded slowly, his eyes reflecting both pride and the dawning understanding of just how far I had gone beyond what he thought he knew. He didn't press further. He didn't need to. The car pulled into an underground entrance of a towering glass building, one his father had spoken of countless times as though it were his own temple. The doors opened, and I stepped out first, the CEO following me, his presence making it clear this was no courtesy call. My husband remained close, though I could sense he was still piecing together the scale of what was unfolding. We entered the boardroom on the top floor, a long table surrounded by men and women whose decisions shaped industries, markets, and policies. Every face turned as I walked in. Not toward the CEO, not toward my husband, toward me. Their acknowledgement was silent, but it was absolute. The CEO took his seat, but not at the head. That seat belonged to me. I sat without hesitation, placing my hands on the table with the kind of calm that didn't need to demand attention. It already commanded it. My husband stood slightly behind me, a silent witness to the truth his father had mocked away for years. Let's begin, I said, my tone firm, direct. Files opened.
Discussion flowed.
Decisions were made with efficiency, each one finalized with my word. The meeting was not long, but it was pivotal. Contracts signed, new directions established, partnerships secured. All of it without a single mention of my father-in-law. His name wasn't brought up, his role wasn't acknowledged. To them, he was irrelevant. When the meeting concluded, the CEO stood, waiting for me before dismissing the others. As the board members filed out, each gave a respectful nod, their deference sharp and undeniable. My husband watched it all, his silence carrying more weight than words could have. Once the room emptied, I finally turned to him. This is why I stayed quiet at that table. Power doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to boast. It simply exists. And when the time comes, it reveals itself without question. He exhaled slowly, his shoulders relaxing, the tension of the dinner behind us finally dissolving. He'll never recover from this, he said softly.
No, irablia.
And that's the point. He needed to see it. They all did. The CEO excused himself, leaving us alone in the room. My husband moved closer, his voice steadier now. You've changed everything. For me, for him, for all of them. I stood, walking toward the window where the city stretched endlessly below. Lights flickered, streets buzzed, but up here, the noise couldn't reach. I turned back to him, my decision clear. I don't need him to respect me, but I needed him to understand. Tonight he did. And from this point forward, he'll never look at me, or us, the same way again. Later that evening, we returned home. My phone buzzed once, a message from my mother-in-law. Just 4 words. He hasn't spoken since. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. The silence, she described, was enough. At the next family gathering, the shift was visible. My father-in-law no longer filled the room with laughter at anyone's expense. He no longer leaned back in his chair with arrogance. He sat quieter, smaller, his eyes avoiding mine whenever I entered. The family noticed. The cousins who once chuckled at his mockery now stayed still, careful with their words. His authority had not just cracked, it had collapsed. Not with an apology, not with reconciliation, but with the quiet, undeniable knowledge that the hierarchy had changed forever, and nothing he did could ever undo it.